Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming on Labor Day of all times. Thank you. Happy holidays to you. Happy Labor Day. I'm here with my friend Asha Rangappa, and I'm sure you've seen her speak all the time on MSNBC, CNN, and across the major networks. Former FBI counterterrorism agent, and the author of The Freedom Academy, which is the theme of today's Substack Live. What is the state of freedom this Labor Day? And interestingly enough, when July 4th rolled around this year, I was just talking to Asha about this. There was a case, a DVD versus Trump, where the lawyers were working around the clock to prevent the Trump administration from sending 8 men to South Sudan. And that effort ultimately was unsuccessful. The Supreme Court intervened. The men were sent ultimately to South Sudan. But I remember saying at the time on a Substack Live like this that that the fact that the defense of freedom, the defense of due process didn't take a holiday was a very good sign. And here we are on Labor Day weekend, and there's another very similar story with a bit of a happier ending. And I'm going to pass it over to Asha soon to talk about it. It was the case of the unaccompanied minors, the children from Guatemala, who the Trump administration in the dead of night were going to deport from the country. As a matter of fact, it was 1:02 a.m. on Sunday, August 31st. Quick action by the lawyers to file a lawsuit in the District of D.C. A federal judge immediately called for a hearing, put a stop to it, a temporary restraining order. That has held. She had immediately ordered a status report to confirm that her order was being followed. And it was. The Drew Ensign from the Justice Department said that he expects the children to deplane because of the judge's order. And I thought that was a good place to start, Asha, with the defense of freedom and due process not taking a holiday.
Yeah, I mean, I think the flip side of the fact that lawyers are working around the clock on holiday weekends is that the government is trying to do this
Right.
in the dead of night on a holiday weekend. And, it seems to me that that's strategic. It's because they know that fewer people are going to be reading their papers and watching television or tuning into a Substack Live to know about it, right? And um, it does seem like there's a lot there was, something similar also. Do you remember in, I think it was the Northern District or Southern District of Texas, I believe, where it was like they had the planes ready to take off at 1 in the morning. I mean, this is a pattern. It's reminding me as we're talking about it, how I felt after 9/11, um, because you realize that the 9/11 Commission later called it a failure of imagination, but you realize that there are people who are literally spending all of their time figuring out how to evade our legal system in
Right.
order to achieve these goals. I mean, I think that's what's happening, and that's what's very different with this administration than I think anything that has ever happened before.
Absolutely.
To get as close to the line, even cross it and see how far they can go. But this is, it's not accidental that this happened over Labor Day weekend.
Absolutely. And at 1:02 in the morning, to reiterate that incredible detail. And immediately the lawyers snapped into action, filed the lawsuit. A federal judge in Washington, D.C. quickly acted on it. But this is happening over the holiday weekend. I think another news that broke over the holiday weekend was Trump purporting to issued an executive order purporting to mandate voter ID across the country, which is another one of those executive orders of I'm going to outlaw flag burning, which is protected under the First Amendment of the Constitution. This is settled law from no less of an conservative authority than Antonin Scalia and other Supreme Court justices putting this issue to bed. But as you were saying, Asha, there's this let's test the line mentality that it's throwing out a plainly illegal and plainly unconstitutional executive orders one after another and let it be litigated.
Yeah, in my last Substack roundup, which went out this past Saturday, and it's open to everyone, you can find it on my Substack. I included a link to our colleague Kim Lane Chappelle's an article that she wrote. She's a professor at Princeton. She studies Hungary and Brazil and democratic erosion. Um, but she said there's a method to the madness of these like blatantly unconstitutional EOs, and she calls it the counter constitution. That this is so, for people who are watching, especially if you're not, from the United States, the US Constitution is pretty much impossible to amend. It requires a lot, all states, and it's a very, very long process to get through, and that's why it hasn't been amended that often. But one of my constitutional law professor said when I was taking con law my first year of law school, he said every Supreme Court justice is a walking constitutional amendment. And so what she says is these EOs are a counter constitution. It is how Trump wants to rewrite the Constitution. And because you can't actually formally, I mean, you can, but because it would not be feasible to formally amend it, what you do is you present, as you said, these obviously unconstitutional things, and then you force it to get litigated, just like the birthright citizenship. I mean, things that we have never questioned, right? And then it lands in the lap, ultimately, of the Supreme Court that seems to be on board with a lot of this.
Right. And what you were saying, you mentioned Kim Chappelle had mentioned that Kim Chappelle, another piece of where she's coming from, she has studied very much in depth the authoritarian moves of the Hungarian government of Viktor Orban, and she has studied that and has shown the autocratic rise and the erosion of democracy in that country. And I think that goes to kind of the theme of our conversation here, where on the one hand, as you said, Asha, the very fact that the Trump administration is doing things like this in the dead of night on a holiday weekend, forcing legal battles that will go all the way up to the Supreme Court, shows the attack on the democracy, and at the same time is inspiring a constant defense, and people are paying attention in large numbers. Today, there were more than 1,000 protests scheduled across the country. Many people watching right now may have attended some of them. Where do you think this push and pull is? The state of it, given where we started, are things more dire than you would have expected? Maybe when summer began, when the second term began, or uh, or has the pushback been more formidable, more potent than you had expected?
Oh, I don't think the pushback has been formidable enough. This
Mm,
has surprised me, and I think it's surprised most people. Um, since the start of this administration, I knew that it was going to be bad. I did not think it was going to be this bad, and I did not think it would happen at this speed.
mm,
I mean, we're in a place where there's military on the streets of DC, right?
correct.
And that they were
Yeah.
deployed to LA. I mean, so I think we have crossed a Rubicon, and I think that for me, where I have been shocked and disappointed is how weak the institutions that I thought would push back have been, like the law firms, I mean, that they just folded like a deck of cards. I mean, it was kinda crazy. Some universities, like things like that. And so, I think that people are starting to realize because we have been so fortunate for, our country's history, that we have typically had institutions and, not just government, the branches of government, but also civil society and things like that, lawyers and universities and labor and, all these different things. But I think in the end of the day, it is going to come down to the people.
Right.
We're in, and I do think in that way, there people are starting to wake up. And one silver lining, I guess, if you could call it that, of this shock and awe, speed, and spectacle, which the Trump administration has done, is people people have paid attention. Right? Like, I mean, in other words, there is a way that this could have happened in dribs and drabs in like little, ways that might have gone under the radar for a lot of people and not actually changed, their day-to-day lives so much. But like, if you have troops coming to a street near you, it's time for you to pay attention.
Right. And one of the things, it's interesting. Some of you had mentioned the abdication of giant law firms and how, for me, one of the shocking things was seeing the response of ABC and CBS
Yeah,
to
media is
the
never enough.
absolutely frivolous lawsuits that were filed against them. One of them, with in ABC's case, it was a question of attributing something to the jury instead of the judge. And with CBS, it was normal editing and just total abdication here. Yet at the same time, we see a proliferation of independent outlets with the big law firms. You're seeing the all of these mega firms kowtowing and offering pro bono services to the Trump administration. At the same time, one of the first stories that I covered for All Rise News was of Georgetown University students who created a spreadsheet of the law firms that were abdicating and caving to the Trump administration. And the ones that are fighting back, just if you look at that spreadsheet, like hundreds of different firms, and they're vastly outnumbered by the ones that are fighting back. And I guess the common theme that I'm finding here is that the cravenness of some of the largest institutions has been surprising, how quickly that has happened. And the organized pushback on a more granular and a more grassroots level has happened with a greater force. I didn't expect necessarily, you know, we've seen so many 1,000+ protests, from No Kings to hands off, and this weekend workers over billionaires. These are now routine events, and is there and I wonder if things are, and to give another example and to put the conversation in another kind of like recent breaking news event, grand juries. Uh, I
That's the
remember
people.
that's the
That's the
people,
people. That's the
right?
people. Yeah, I agree. And I do think that people need to think more than just protest, right? I mean, that is so
Right.
important. But, or maybe to think that protest can encompass a lot of different forms. That's not just going out with a sign, which is also important, but it's like understanding if you're impaneled on a grand jury or a petite jury, what you are seeing, there is something called jury nullification, and when something is unjust, but also that you know I'm gonna lose my I lost my thought. I was just going to say something hopeful. I've been kind of paying attention. Oh, to get local. I mean, I think one of the biggest things that I have been thinking about is how important local affairs are, because we get so caught up in um, what's happening, in Washington at the White House, that there are ways to get engaged. You know, it could be your PTA or school board, or it could be, running for some local office. But I mean, the local is where the laboratories of democracy are. That is what Tocqueville taught us. That's where the habits of democracy are. Subscribe to your local paper or your home. I subscribe to my hometown paper from Virginia, just to like and it is a way to get you back grounded on, you know, we have power in our own corners of the world. And if everybody exercised power in their own corner of the world, or this country, we can make a difference, right? Because it's very easy to feel powerless when you're looking at something so far away. And I mean, and this was, I think, sort of, how the progressive era turned things around, right? I mean, the Gilded Age is very similar to the moment we're in now. Acute income inequality, huge technological change, xenophobia, all of these things, oligarchs, right? The industrialists. And what you had was power coming from the ground up,
Mhm.
grassroots movements.
Right. And to that point, Caroline Levitt said in a recent press conference, she was boasting about the new gilded White House. I remember her using that word. The literal definition of gilded, you're putting the over a baser metal. You're covering up something. That's why it's known as the Gilded Age. It was this surface of wealth and prosperity,
It's
but there was
that's
all of
Trump's
this.
favorite era, by the way. He loves the
Yes.
Gilded Age. Oh, yeah,
Right.
tariffs. Lots of tariffs in the Gilded Age, right?
Right. Absolutely. And yeah, to that point, it's very interesting. I saw someone commenting when you emphasize, I think very appropriately, the importance of local action. And it's going to be very interesting to me to see if these 1,000+ protests across the countries are channeled into local action. I saw someone said, well, I'm in red Florida. I remember I interviewed someone very recently from bright red Tennessee, in the middle of a very strong effort of civic engagement, trying to stop the opening of an ICE detention center in that state. The immigration fights are happening in red states and blue states, and all across the country. I to Just to get your expertise as former FBI counterterrorism agent, the I, in terms of distrust of institutions, I'm wondering, at the beginning of the second Trump administration, I remember there was a lot of apprehension about will the jails fill up with his enemies, with these vindictive prosecutions. And lo and behold, he's having trouble indicting people, not let alone, trying to convict people, send people into jails. To how much that people have a lot of justified distrust over institutions, but when they see, for example, the raid on John Bolton's home and office, to what extent uh, should folks, one, immediately have their skepticism up, given the longstanding history between Trump and John Bolton, but two, have faith in the process to understand, the rights he will have once this process, if it moves forward.
Yeah, so I used to be an institutionalist, like a hardcore one,
Right.
and I think, the problem is that institutions aren't like, um, independent robots that just exist.
Right.
Institutions are made up of people. So the amount that you can trust an institution rests largely on the kinds of people that are in them. We were able to trust the CDC because it used to be run by experts. You might not agree with, maybe their whatever they were doing at all times. Um, but you trusted that they understood what their mission was, that they were working within the rules of their profession, of that agency, for example. Same thing, I would argue, with the Justice Department. And importantly, part of the reason that we were also able to trust institutions is that they had internal guardrails to ensure that when people in these institutions went rogue or engaged in misconduct, there were mechanisms there to identify them. Things like inspectors general, for example. What's happened is that Trump has gotten rid of all of those oversight and enforcement within the branch. He's purged the people who actually have the knowledge and expertise. Um, and he's replacing them. I
Right.
mean, we're in a situation where we may not be able to actually trust statistics. I mean, it's
Mhm.
Orwellian, right? This is the
Right.
Ministry of Truth. Having said that, the only thing that I think gives me any kind of, I won't say confidence, but like I am willing to give some benefit of the doubt on the Bolton raid is because there it was still another layer. Like even if all this this chaos is happening in the executive branch, they did have to go to a separate and impartial branch and, magistrate, 2 of them,
Right.
actually, 2 of
2
them,
separate
2
magistrates for
separate
this.
magistrates in order to get it. So to me, that I don't take lightly. And I think that that is, it's one thing for the legal questions that get percolated up to the Supreme Court. So, in the courts, um, juries decide facts, judges decide law. So there might be big legal questions that ultimately get decided by, the Supreme Court or, appellate courts and things. But at the end of the day, at the individual level, those fates do lie in the hands of juries,
Right.
grand jury, and those due process protections to get, to get the search warrant, to get the indictment, the ability to um, raise certain defenses like selective prosecution or, tainted evidence or whatever, you can do. I still have faith in those. So, let's see. I think I'll see if the Trump administration puts their money where their mouth is and actually indicts John Bolton.
Right, and it's very interesting, you can see it in the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case. So the Trump administration seems to be trying to sidestep the courts because that's where they keep losing, and
Yeah.
now they have him in immigration detention in Virginia. There's the entire question of whether he will be deported before there is a trial, before they have to put competent evidence before a jury after losing every step of the way in civil litigation and criminal litigation. And when there seems to be very flagrantly political prosecution, take Newark Mayor Ross Baraka, his arrest and charging, it collapses immediately. And I wonder if there's something of a Trumpian project to say, you can't trust the courts, where, while very imperfect, they're a lever of the people's power, as grand juries are proving again and again and again. I think it's astonishing that you have three that we know about grand juries in a row returning no bills. Like it's not something you routinely see. That it's the standard is
Yeah, it's
so
probable cause, right? I
probable
mean, they
cause.
only hear from the government.
And yeah, there is no
Yeah.
defense attorney in that room. There is, the government has as much time as they need to present whatever evidence. They don't need to show exculpatory evidence, so far as I understand it. Um,
I mean, I think one thing that could be going on and that you see in the way that the Trump administration is, behaving in court, in my experience, prosecutors and FBI agents did not want to lose their credibility with courts. That is a huge amount of currency that you have as the government of the United States, right? And so, extra care is taken so that you don't, put yourself in situations where the judge distrusts you because you need the judge on your side to do a lot of things. What we're seeing is a contempt by the executive branch of a co-equal branch. Like outright contempt. I don't mean legal
right,
contempt, which
right,
we've
right,
seen that too, but just like contempt, right? We saw this in the whistleblowers allegations of what what's his face Bove said behind the scenes on, how to treat the courts and stuff. I have to believe that that attitude is coming through
right.
when the government presents their case.
Hmm.
Right? So this gets to again the trust issue, right? Like it used to be, I think a lot of people would be willing to give the government the benefit of the doubt. Like, they're not going to indict this guy unless something's there, or, but as you said, it seems like they're not even able to make this case, or um, they are losing that benefit of the doubt.
Right, right. And to bring this conversation full circle, where we were talking about the Guatemalan children this weekend, that it reminds me very much, with a very different outcome, the flights to El Salvador from March 15th. They loaded people up on the plane. Immediately, a lawsuit is filed. Chief Judge Boasberg snaps into action. There is a hearing, there is a ruling. You must turn those planes around. The government ignores it. The planes land in El Salvador, and the hundreds of men are carted off to C-Cop prison, where they are tortured. And what happens this weekend? There is a dead of night decision to put children on a plane to Guatemala. There is an immediate lawsuit filed, and there is a quick hearing, an order, take them off that plane, and it is followed. So there's this interesting thing where I think even this government, and they're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart. They're not doing it to please the judge. They're doing it because it is in their best interest.
But you
Part of the
said that
release
this
of camaraderie.
judge, I haven't actually read what the judge's order was, but you said that she worded it without any ambiguity, which is something that, they tried to capitalize on, right? In Judge Boasberg.
Correct.
Like,
And
oh, they were in the air and we didn't know if that meant once they left or whatever it is. So first of all, what I would say is, and I don't mean to be too much of a skeptic, but first of all, I think the same guy that was involved in the Boasberg case is involved in this Guatemala case. So he knows that his actual livelihood, there could be grievance filed against him if he's if he's the one who's repeatedly,
yeah,
violating court orders all over the place. It was Drew Ensign, right, who was in Boasberg.
correct. Drew
Yeah.
Ensign.
So I think there is some self-interest there.
Oh, yeah.
Not any kind of some great respect for the court, but it gets to this other concept. And I'll send you, the piece. This is from a long time ago, and it involved the courts. But I talked about the concept of cool trust, and so trust is important, right? But I've said before that the government wants to go in and be trusted because it lubricates our interactions. When the government has capital with, the judges that it's appearing in front of, it can just do more. And it can probably not have to show as much, or, so it makes their whole world more efficient. Okay. The thing is that when you lose that kind of social trust that exists, you move into something what sociologists call cool trust, which is where norms are replaced by formal rules. And what I'm hearing you saying is that judges are realizing that they need to now everything is going to be much more formalized, I think, because because what you have are people who are going to exploit any kind of ambiguity. But in some ways, that might not be bad because this is not an administration that is willing to honor norms.
Right.
They
And
might honor formal rules
right.
because they have to.
And to your point, there was a recent hearing before Judge Zinis in the Kilmar-Abrego Garcia case where she had ordered the government that they should not move him outside of the continental United States or beyond a 200-mile radius of the courts. And she said, do I need to put that in writing? And that was a direct reference to what happened in Boasberg.
Exactly.
Because there was the exploitation of a perceived ambiguity. And
Well, that's right. They said that he did a verbal order and they didn't know because it wasn't a written order. They didn't think they had to follow it or something.
Absolutely.
Which makes zero sense.
EdBub was accepted by one Trump-appointed judge on the D.C. circuit, apparently. But that is, and that's where we're at. And to your point, it's absolutely true that this is entirely out of self-interest that they are trying to appease the courts in the it's very interesting. They never say, well, we're flouting your order, Your Honor. They say, oh no, we have gone over in our effort to follow it while exploiting any perceived ambiguity. And it goes to your point about that there's a real cachet in that the government doesn't want to lose. And in some cases, as you mentioned, professional consequences for doing the wrong thing.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see. I frankly think they've already crossed the line. I will say that I talked to some people who are still in denial and feel like, oh, well, when they actually defy a court order, I'll be worried. And I'm like, I don't think you're paying attention to what's going
Right.
on. But I do think that, and I have to say the lower courts are getting it from both sides,
Right.
right? Because they're getting, they're being played by the government or the government is trying to play them. Meanwhile, like some appellate court judges and the conservative wing of the Supreme Court is throwing them under the bus in
It's
some of their
yeah,
rulings and, with very harsh language, like, claiming that they're abusing their authority by ruling in certain ways. So I do think that maybe the hardest job right now is these district court judges who are right on the front lines, who are getting it from both sides, in my opinion. And you know, I think for right now, I am grateful that many of them, frankly, some who are Trump appointees, I mean, in the Alien Enemies Act, even, who are like, what are you even doing? Who are trying to hold down the fort to some degree. I
right.
mean, they can't do everything because, they're not going to save us because not everything is in front of them. But to the extent that it is, I think many of them are really doing a valiant job.
Absolutely, and they are trial court judges. They could be overruled. And another piece of that puzzle is they are under attack. There's been a spate of whether pizza doxing or other threats to them. Chief Judge Boasberg has been the subject of a misconduct complaint filed by the Department of Justice over something that he said in a private closed door meeting that wouldn't be unethical even if he had been quoted correctly, which he wasn't. But to your point, they're acting, many of them, very courageously under a real campaign of intimidation and threats.
Yeah. But I think, like I said, we need to just take our power back, and realize I posted again in the most recent I had a conversation with Joyce Vance yesterday for my subscribers. I do like a monthly office hours and I circulated some resources after, and one is a great piece by Ellie Mistel who from The Nation this weekend, which really talked about this, like the power of the people, but also the power of the smallest acts of noncompliance.
Mm,
And one of the things he said to me that to me was very powerful was that in this administration, kindness is an act of noncompliance
mm,
because it is so built on this contempt and hatred of the other that even just simply interacting with people daily in ways that kind of affirm our community and solidarity is, and truly that is kryptonite for an authoritarian regime.
mm.
So I'm just trying to kind of hang on to that. That helped me a lot.
And to your, the name of your Substack again is the Freedom Academy. To preserve that freedom, you had talked about local organizing. What's stuff folks can do from your point of view, more in the local level?
Oh my gosh. I mean, one documentary that I watched recently, because I teach his work in my class, is it's a documentary called Join or Die, and
Hmm.
it's all about this. So just watch it. It's about it's narrated by Robert Putnam, who wrote Bowling Alone, which is a fantastic book, and it's about social trust and civic engagement, and how civic engagement um, is directly correlated with this social trust, right? Like this feeling that we um, are all in this together. And so he gives a number of things. I mean, I think it doesn't have to be only political. It is, just getting off your screen and joining some local organization. Your bowling league, if your bowling alley still has one. I mean, ways where you get to know your fellow community members. And what he talks about is very similar to what Tocqueville said, that in these you know, in these organizations, even if they're not, official government organizations, we learn the habits of democracy. We learn to find consensus. We learn how to resolve disagreements. We learn how to create rules that benefit everyone. All of these things, and I think that ends up making us feel empowered and connected, and then that can be scaled once you have, both those skills and those networks. So that's what I would say in terms of getting engaged. Yes, Robert Putnam. The book is called Bowling Alone, and the documentary is called Join or Die. And I think it's on Netflix. It's on a number of streaming platforms.
Well, thank you very much, Asha. This was a great conversation. For folks who are joining in a little bit late, just see the top left of your screen. You can subscribe to All Rise News and Asha's Substack, the Freedom Academy, if you want to see this conversation in full later. Thank you for joining. I think that's a great note to end on. And
Yes.
happy Labor Day to everyone.
Bye, guys. Thanks for joining.